Hello, so in this video we're going to be looking at a Sony SL-F205. This is a Japanese market machine. It's actually 1998 vintage, so it's 22 years old as of when this video comes out. And I believe these were made up until 1999, and they were the last sort of basic run-of-the-mill Betamax machine that Sony produced. I understand that in Japan they did actually make some high-end machines for another couple of years, up until about 2002, from what I understand. But to be honest, searching on the internet and trying to get any sort of real meaningful information, I haven't really found anything that sort of really tells the story then. So I'd be really interested to know more details, basically, on what happened with the last sort of Sony Betamax machines, and what they were and what they were like. So yes, really interesting bit of kit, and I bought this just out of pure curiosity to see what it was like, and just to see what the quality of the build was like, especially because through the 90s there was a general move towards making very flimsy, very cheap and nasty machines, especially for the sort of lower end of the market, the consumer market. So we're going to take this apart and have a look at it, and have a look at the deck and the printed circuit boards. Take it from there. So before we look inside, let's have a quick look at what this machine has. So it has a really rather nice remote control, a few little scratches on it, but mainly in Japanese, as you'd expect. It's a Japanese machine. I imported this, and it actually ended up costing me a lot of money. It was $80 when I started off, then it was $60 for the postage, then I had to pay import duty, and it ended up becoming sort of like working out at something like £200 for this very basic machine. So it wasn't really a very much of a bargain. It was it did arrive in fully working order, beautifully packed, and it just needed a service, a good clean up, a dust out, and it was great. But still, it was a lot of money for what it was. But sometimes you have to do these things, don't you? So basic remote, play, fast forward, rewind, and picture search, stop. It's fairly self-explanatory, really. Pause, record with the safety buttons. It's quite cool. On off. It uses the later IR control set. So this will also operate obviously basic functions, things like the HF950, a lot of the later US Betamaxes as well, but not things like the C9, C30, F30, as they use the older IR control sets of commands. So yeah, rather nice remote, sort of very much in keeping with Sony at the time. The 8mm Video 8 machines had very similar remotes. So the machine itself, it is a high-band Betamax. Very simple switch between the two. NTSC only, 100 volts. So not even suitable for US, really. So Japan use 100 volts, and I believe 220 volts as well in some regions, or they used to. Maybe not by 1999, because this has no voltage switch. Basic functions: play. Obviously, you've got the picture searches, stop, pause, record. Also has TV VTR, video tape recorder, VCR. Beta 2.3, and which button is it? And it's also got a real-time clock, counter rather, which is actually really handy. 7-day, 1 event, easy programmable timer. So basic. Yeah, I'm guessing that's that's timer. There's timer sets. It's quite interesting. I suppose. And resets. So I can't read Japanese, so forgive me. I'm just sort of finding my way. It's got this slider tracking control as well. I'm never too sure if I like these. In some ways, they make sense. But in other ways, I'm sort of more into the rotary controls. I don't know. Maybe it's a European thing or whatever. But yeah, and it does also have, which is you have to have for the 90s, the gold feet. So yes, very, very upmarket as a result of having those gold feet. Makes it a lot more expensive. So yeah, there we go. It's a bit of a walk around, if you like, of the machine. So let's go ahead and take it apart. So let's eject the tape. The sounds are fairly familiar if you're used to Sony betas. It's actually quite nice because the guy that sent this to me actually included a tape. Can at last. Sorry if I pronounced that badly, but yeah, it's quite a cool tape, to be honest. Very Japanese, so very 80s. But probably find it's 90s actually. And what's quite fun about it is it does actually have the Beta 2 sticker sort of hanging on for dear life on the edge there. It says there 1980. There we go. So yeah, I've been enjoying that while testing this machine. So without further ado, let's take it apart. Okay, so let's go. Video leads. Okay, so that's all the covers taken off. You do actually have to a couple of screws in the bottom here, and you do actually have to take this out if you're taking the front off. You don't have to if you're taking just the base off, but if you're taking the front off, you need to. So that caught me out slightly, although I'm not overly surprised. So let's lift a panel. So as you can see, it's pretty much a single main panel. Everything is just on one PCB, and all the logic, syscon, cutter, video, tuner, and then obviously you have the front panel and all the switches, tracking control. You can see the display is attached to the main panel. It just drops down like the F40. Am I right in thinking that? The UK F40, the very basic beta, of which not many were sold in the UK. Yeah, that actually pulls quite tight on that regulator there. That's obviously desperate to get some cooling over there. So RF modulator there. Power supply. It's actually a fairly basic power supply. It is a switch mode power supply. And why didn't I know that? So actually not a bad power supply, to be fair. Yeah, so that's pretty impressive. A lot of machines at this time, basic machines anyway, were using just mains transformers. So that's actually really nice to see that it's got a proper switch mode power supply, good regulation and reduction of noise. So the deck itself is familiar if you know these machines. See, there's actually not very much wear there at all. A little bit of shining there going on the top drum, and like in the blue spools. It's like it should have had a window in the top, isn't it? But yeah, it's very similar to older betas. It's going to hold that board so it doesn't fall down. But of course, it's all driven off the capstan motor. So very much gone like VHS machines, really. What is interesting is the head motor. Now the head motor looks very suspiciously like a VHS head drum motor. Very similar technology, and I really wouldn't put it past Sony to have gone that way, to be honest. Makes sense. You know, they make the chips. Probably the servo chip is the same as they were using in maybe some of their VHS machines, I don't know. But it's a move forward from the older style of motor, which basically they used in all of their machines from pretty much the C9 onwards up until, I don't know, F30s had them, 950s, UK machines, of course, and many US machines as well use the same, pretty much the same motor, but this is clearly a VHS inspired motor, completely different Hall effect sensor, and ultimately a lot more modern. So yeah, not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just like, ooh. And motor drive chip there as well. So yeah, it's certainly very much scaled down. There's a board from the underneath. It's a very empty machine, and it does feel, I have to say, it feels cheap and flimsy. But on the other hand, it doesn't feel as cheap and flimsy as the budget VHS machines. It's not a bad machine. And this deck, I mean, it's pretty well tried and tested and well proven. So yeah, you can't really knock it for the time for a budget machine. So again, I'm struggling a bit to find information on what this deck, or this deck's designation, actually is. It's very much like a B3, 711 B3. Has a mode switch, which is under there. Just a bog standard cheap and nasty motor, relatively cheap and nasty. And it does bear real resemblance to sort of some of the later ME decks that I've worked on, like the 400 ME and even the 700 ME. So yeah, I would probably say it's a B3 with a little bit of a change because of the head motor. Although, of course, there is the drive. There's a drive off the capstan. So, was there a B4? I don't know. I'd love to find out more about these late decks, because there just seems to be so little information on them. So it'd be a shame for that to be lost, really, to be fair. People go on about the older Betamax decks, but these really ultra late in the history of Betamax machines, they're going to get forgotten. And you get this, it's going to be the same with VHS. I mean, it's really crazy that some of, like, the Panasonic decks, for example, the 80s Panasonic decks, are so rare. You know, it's a shame, because they're really good decks. They're so well built. Whereas the betas, of course, they're fetching big money, and you know, everybody loves them, and obviously people are going up in their attics, what with lockdown having been, and finding all these tapes, and of course suddenly want a machine, and it's pushed the price right up, because they're not the machines to meet the demand. But I'm sure that will change. You know, as everybody gets their machines and then does what they want to do with the tapes and then sells them on. So probably the market will get saturated again, and it'll all be cheap and cheerful. So we'll see. So yeah, so that's basically the whole machine. What is nice, as you might know if you sort of know the laser machines, some of the laser machines, like the F40, I keep saying F40, it might be F45, but the basic machine has a can top metal can that has a diagram on it. It has a diagram showing where all the boards are, and not to electrocute yourself if you prod your finger in the power supply, because it actually had bare mains connections, just like in the corner there, which this doesn't. This is actually quite nice. This one has that little diagram here. And I think that's rather nice how they've done that. And even bothered to do that. So, yeah, I like that. That's nice. Even though, well, it's fairly self-explanatory, really. I mean, it's not like an HF950 or an HF750 in the US or whatever, you know, which is actually quite handy to know where all the boards are and what they do. Relatively single board. But yeah, really cool. So it's taken the glory of this fine machine. Obviously, they were using boards across different machines for this join here, or maybe that's something to do with just transits. But I would suggest it's probably just to do with different machines, just having different controls available on this part of the board. This board would be used in multiple versions. I don't know. Again, let me know. Love the way they've got these these switches. That's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's actually quite unusual for Japanese stuff to have switches that are just so sort of skew-if. Probably to do with the manufacturing process. Something to speed up the process of putting the buttons in during mass production. Don't know. Again, let me know. Interested in the comments. So yeah, so there we go. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this back together. I'll pull the camera back a bit more so you can see the whole thing. So I know you couldn't see the whole thing before, but it'll be sped up anyway, I'm sure. A quick thought. I don't know whether you've ever noticed, but all Sony screws are not the same. You can quite see that. One is shiny and one is not quite so shiny. I find this with the specialized small screws as well. The screws in the case are shiny and the ones internally are not. And you can usually tell when a machine's been worked on because there's a mix of shiny and sort of dull screws holding like the bottom panel on. It's not a problem, but it's just really interesting how Sony actually had polished screws for the outside cabinet. How cool's that? Anyway, let's crack on, get this machine back together. So I'll put the ribbon cable back in. Gave it clean as well. I cleaned it. Just realised I missed a load of dust. It's actually quite dusty in here. I've dusted it out, still dusty. Hair there. So, powered this back up, powered it up via Variac, 100 volts. So, let's have a look at this. And again, it's a bit It's a bit like the VHS machines with the separate loading motor. Much more simple sort of front loading system, which is very reminiscent of a VHS machine, to be fair. But it's sort of quite nice because you put the tape in and the loading is like a VHS of the time, and yet the loading is like a C9. Really, it sounds very similar. C9, maybe not, because the C9's nice and smooth usually. So maybe something a bit later. F30. Let's go for F30. Sounds very much like an F30. The guide placement is quite interesting as well. How they're sort of set up. Very simple. Just using basic plastic now rather than the carbon doped plastic onto metal guides with a static drain. Which is interesting. I just wonder how that is actually working. So it doesn't introduce static, but it obviously works. It must be maybe the type of plastic. I don't know. Again, comments. Love to know why they went for that. I mean, to be honest, I think it was just really just cheaping it, and they probably found that they got away with this. I mean, they've got the static drain on the top of the HCE head, which machines like the HF950, 750 had, to take static away from the tape shell. So maybe that was enough. Maybe it was enough to do away with having any sort of static drain here. But yeah, interesting. And obviously use a slightly more advanced grease, as you see remnants of. I have actually re-greased this because it was a little bit unhappy from being stood for quite a long time. But yeah, really nice machine. I'm really very, very pleased with it. It's lovely. It is just lovely to see this format right up to its dying day almost. You know, it's a run-of-the-mill machine, 1998, 22 years old. It was produced for one more year as a consumer product in Japan, and then that was it. This model was discontinued. Like I say, a couple of high-end machines went on, probably a part spin special, I don't know. But or just literally so people had the high-end machines to continue using them, the fan base. So yeah, very interesting. Very nice machine, really. That's beta. Where are we? There we go. Really wish I could read Japanese. It would make this so much easier. And of course it's really, really hot in here today. And you can see this plastic marks really easily from sort of slightly greasy fingers when you're hot. But yeah, sort of really cheap plastic. I mean, the actual plastic of the cabinet itself is just terrible. It's so flimsy. But yeah, it's light. It works. It's serviceable. The deck itself is actually really, really good. I mean, you can't fault the deck. The deck is really well thought through for the time when everybody else was putting really, really cheap and nasty decks in. This is still fundamentally the 711 chassis, just with obviously the mode switch, but that's only basic. It's not like if that mode switch fails, it's going to totally destroy the deck, like a G deck, for example. Start smashing gears, it just won't work. And it's great, you know, I mean, fair play. This would have been a cheap machine in its time, relatively. And yeah, to think in 1999 you could buy a Betamax, a brand new Betamax, and still play your tapes. And given the amount of use these machines had, go on for years, really. So yeah, so thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. It's sort of something a bit different insofar as I haven't fixed it or broken it. I hope. And yeah, and very quickly before I do actually close off, let's have a look at the back, because this is a bit different. Sony's, of course, are known for putting BNCs on the back. Not so this. This has become very much like a basic VHS. And what is interesting is every Betamax I know, Sony Betamax I know, you'd assume this is the output for the video, this is the output for the audio. Not so on this. This is like a Panasonic. This is the output for the video, this is the output for the audio, and the inputs are here. So obviously aerial connections here, similar to the US, VHF, UHF, and then you've got the normal figure of 8 in there, and the loop through, which I always think is a great idea. Shame they couldn't do something like that in the UK, but can you imagine having a 13 amp style plug on the back? I suppose you could have a component style plug, but it is too complex for the UK, so that's cool. Let's have a quick look at the power supply as well. So yeah, so there we go. So that is the lovely Sony SL-F205. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in another one.